My mother threatened to remove me from her will unless I married her pick. I showed her that her money meant nothing to me. Open with a slightly incredulous, then firm, almost angry tone. Can you believe my own mother, the woman who supposedly loved me, once threatened to cut me out of her will entirely just because I wouldn't marry a stranger she picked for me? It wasn't just about money. It was about absolute control, and that day, I realized her love was nothing but a weapon. My mother, Renata, wielded her inherited fortune like a sword, an invisible leash around our necks. Every major decision in our family, where we lived, what schools we attended, even our careers, had to pass her approval. Otherwise, pause, financial consequences, threats of being disinherited. Growing up, I honestly thought this was normal. I thought phrases like, "You'll get nothing when I die," were just family banter. I genuinely believed love and inheritance were the same thing. By the time I understood how utterly twisted that was, I was already so deep in the cycle. I was constantly trying to earn her approval, constantly performing. I became a lawyer because she wanted one in the family. I dated people she approved of, terrified she'd stop paying my student loans if I didn't. I smiled through endless, soul-crushing social events because my future, my comfort, depended on staying in her good graces. My younger brother, though, he figured out the game way sooner. At 17, he rebelled. At 18, he moved across the country. My mother cut him off completely. Voice hardens, she told everyone he was dead to her. She changed her will publicly and made sure the whole family knew he'd receive nothing. He was her chilling warning, a living, breathing example of what happened when you dared to defy her. I watched, I learned, and I stayed quiet. Then Franklin walked into my life. He was a carpenter, a craftsman who built custom furniture for wealthy clients, earning a decent living doing work he absolutely loved. We met at a coffee shop. He complimented the book I was reading, and before I knew it, 2 hours had flown by. I gave him my number. I didn't even think about what my mother would say. For 6 months, I kept him a complete secret. I told Mom I was too busy with work. I saw Franklin on weekends, pretending I was visiting friends. I was falling in love while living a double life. It was thrilling, terrifying, and utterly mine. But of course, she found out. My mother had eyes and ears everywhere. Someone saw us at a restaurant, described Franklin as working class. The phone rang. It was her, demanding an explanation. I told her the truth. I'd been dating someone and I was happy. She asked what he did. I told her. Pause. Exhale slowly, she said. Absolutely not. She demanded I end it immediately. She had someone else in mind, you see. Lawson, the son of one of her wealthy friends. Finance, old money, exactly the kind of husband she could brag about. She'd been planning this match for years. She just hadn't bothered to tell me. I told her I wasn't interested in Lawson. I was in love with Franklin.
She scoffed.
Love is irrelevant, she said. Financial security is what matters. Franklin could never provide the life you deserve. Then came the hammer blow. End things with him, or I will remove you from my will entirely. You'll get nothing. You'll be as dead to me as your brother. I asked for 2 weeks to think. But I wasn't thinking about her expectations anymore. I was thinking about my brother, who had survived. I was thinking about Franklin, who built beautiful things with his hands and never once cared about my family's money. I was thinking about myself and the person I'd become, desperately trying to please a woman who only loved me conditionally. What did I truly want? At the end of those 2 weeks, I called her. I told her I chose Franklin. She said she was disappointed, but not surprised. She called it the biggest mistake of my life. She said her lawyer would change the will by the end of the week. Remember this moment, she sneered, when you're struggling in a few years, while Lawson's wife lives comfortably. Then she hung up. I expected devastation, crushing despair. But instead, a wave of pure, unadulterated freedom washed over me. The threat she had held over me my entire life finally landed, and I was still standing. She had no more power over me because she'd used her only weapon. You can't threaten someone with something that's already happened. I threw myself into building a life that didn't depend on her. I got promoted twice in 3 years at my law firm, Franklin, and I bought a small house. I reconnected with my brother, who had built a successful life for himself. I learned that my mother's money would always come with strings attached. I was better off earning my own. My mother didn't speak to me for 2 years. She told relatives I'd chosen a construction worker over my own family. She painted herself as the victim of an ungrateful daughter. Then her health started declining. The phone rang at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. I was reading in bed. Franklin was working on designs in the corner. I almost didn't answer. Pause, but something made me pick up. It was my Aunt Macy, her voice shaky and rushed. My mother had collapsed. Heart attack. Memorial Hospital. It looked bad. My hand wouldn't stop shaking as I wrote down the room number. Franklin looked up, hearing the shift in my voice. He was by my side before I hung up. He said, "I'll drive you there right now." I just nodded. We got dressed in silence. The drive was 20 minutes of silent dread. Franklin didn't ask if I was okay. He knew I wasn't. He just drove, his hand finding my knee sometimes. The hospital garage smelled like oil and antiseptic. The cardiac unit on the 4th floor was too bright, too cold. A nurse pointed me down the hall. Room 4C. I stopped about 15 feet away. Franklin stopped with me. Through the small window, I could see her. My mother, hooked up to machines that beeped and hummed. She looked so small, so vulnerable. Her hair was loose, her face devoid of makeup, in a hospital gown instead of her usual designer clothes. I stood there counting the machines. Franklin gently touched my shoulder. "Need more time," he whispered. I shook my head, took a deep breath, and pushed the door open. The room smelled of hand sanitizer. Her eyes, closed at first, snapped open. They widened. She looked genuinely shocked to see me. I walked closer. Franklin stayed near the door, giving us space. Her first words? "Where have you been for 2 years?" Not hello. Not thank you for coming. Just an accusation, as if I was the one who had disappeared. My jaw tightened, but I kept my voice level. "I'm here now, Mom. How are you?" I asked what the doctors told her. She stared, clearly weighing whether to push the guilt trip or accept this fragile olive branch. She chose to let it go. Her heart was failing. It was close. A young doctor with tired eyes came in. He explained cardiac function, valve problems, surgical options. My mother needed surgery within days. Months of recovery. She couldn't live alone. I asked practical questions, success rates, risks, recovery time. My mother watched me, probably searching for signs of either total devotion or complete abandonment. I gave her neither. I just listened, taking notes on my phone. Franklin drove me home around 2 a.m. I called my boss, leaving a message I'd be late. I didn't sleep. The next week was a blur of hospital visits squeezed between work. I went Tuesday after a deposition. Thursday during my lunch break. My mother was grateful but also wounded, like I should be there more. Like I should drop everything. Franklin saw it. He noticed I came home tense and quiet. Saturday morning, he found me staring at my coffee. He sat down. "I'm worried about you," he said. "You're exhausted, anxious. You need to figure out what level of involvement you can actually handle before this consumes you." His words made sense, but I had no answer. My brother, Juliet, called me that Monday. We hadn't talked in months. He'd heard the gossip. How bad was it? I told him everything. We ended up talking for 2 hours, sharing stories of her patterns, realizing we felt the same confusing mix of concern and resentment. Talking to him, sharing that burden, helped more than I expected. It made me feel less alone. Wednesday evening, back at the hospital, an old friend of my mother's, Alex, cornered me by the vending machines. "You need to forgive and forget," he declared. "Family is everything. Blood is thicker than water. Your mother is sick and scared." I kept my voice polite but firm. "You don't know the full story, Alex. I'm doing what I can manage. This is between my mother and me." He looked disappointed, like he expected me to crumble. I walked into a room. She was picking at a dinner tray. She started talking in that careful voice she used when she wanted something. She'd been thinking. She handled things badly 2 years ago. She was sorry I felt hurt by her decisions. Pause, a slightly bitter chuckle. Sorry I felt hurt. Not sorry for what she did, but sorry I had feelings about it. Like my reaction was the problem. The small hope I'd been carrying deflated. She still didn't understand. She couldn't take real responsibility. I appreciate you trying, Mom, I said and left it at that. The next morning, Gil Farmer, her estate attorney, called. My mother wanted to update her will. She was facing her mortality, he said. Anger, hot and sharp, flared within me. Even from a hospital bed, she was still using her will as a tool. She couldn't just be sick. She couldn't just let me help without turning it into a transaction. I told Gil I didn't want to discuss it, not while she was so ill. He understood, but he was following instructions. Work became impossible. I'd zone out in client meetings. Reread paragraphs 4 times. My boss noticed. She pulled me aside. Everything okay? She asked. I realized I needed to set boundaries before this crisis ate my entire life. I couldn't be the daughter my mother wanted and the lawyer my firm needed. I had to choose. That evening, Franklin was making dinner. I snapped at him for leaving grocery bags on the counter. He stopped chopping, looked at me. The kitchen went silent. You've been on edge for days, he said gently. I'm worried. You say you're handling it, but you're not. You're letting it consume you. Your mother spent years controlling you with money, and now she's controlling you with guilt. And you're letting it happen all over again. I worry you're losing yourself trying to be the perfect daughter for someone who never treated you well. His words landed hard. Because they were true. I'd been so focused on doing the right thing that I forgot to protect myself. I apologized for snapping. He hugged me. We'll figure out what you can actually give, he whispered, without destroying yourself. 2 days later, Juliet called. He'd booked a flight. My heart skipped a beat. Mom hadn't seen him in 5 years. We drove to the hospital together, nervous. When we walked into her room, her face cycled through expressions, surprise, then something like fear, then something softer. She just stared at us, her 2 rejected children, together. Juliet said hello. She said she was tired. Awkward silence filled the room. Then she started crying. Quietly. I never thought I'd see both of you together again, she choked out. I made terrible choices. I pushed away the people who mattered most. It wasn't a full apology, not really, but it was closer than anything she'd said before. We stayed an hour, talking about neutral things. When we left, Juliet said, that was harder than I expected, but better, somehow. Aunt Macy caught me in the parking lot the next day. She said my mother had been talking about how lonely the past 2 years had been. She missed us. She was too proud to admit she was wrong, but she felt bad. Macy had seen her looking at old photos, crying when she thought no one was watching. It wasn't forgiveness, not exactly, but it was understanding. My mother was suffering too. 3 days after her surgery, my mother had a setback. Her heart rate dropped. Machines shrieked. Nurses pushed me out. I watched through the window, terrified. 20 minutes later, the doctor said she was stable, but it had been close. The next 24 hours were critical. I called Juliet. I called Franklin. Then, I went back into her room. She looked so small. All those tubes and wires. I sat down and carefully took her hand. It felt thin and cold. She squeezed back, weakly, without opening her eyes. We sat like that for hours. Not a word was spoken. But something shifted between us in that silence. I realized I didn't want her to die with all this anger and distance between us. I wanted her to know I loved her, even though she'd hurt me. I wanted peace before it was too late. When she finally stabilized and woke up, she seemed different. Softer. She asked about my life with Franklin. Genuinely curious, not judgmental. I told her about our house, the furniture Franklin had built. She listened, didn't interrupt, didn't criticize. She even asked about his work. It felt strange and fragile, like we were both trying hard not to break this small, new connection. I left that day feeling something I hadn't felt about my mother in years. Hope, maybe. Possibility. A week later, her nurse, Catherine, stopped me in the hall. My mother talked about me all the time, she said. There was a photo of me on her bedside table that she looked at constantly. My mother, showing open affection? This was a whole new world. Catherine said my mother had mentioned how much she missed me, how much she regretted her past choices. Maybe facing death had changed her view on what truly mattered. 2 weeks after the surgery, my mother said, "We need to talk." Seriously. I pulled a chair close to her bed. She said she'd been thinking. I was wrong, she admitted, to try and control your life. She said she did it because she wanted me to be secure. She'd grown up with nothing, terrified of being poor again. She thought money could protect me from suffering. Voice softening but firm. "Mom," I said, "real security comes from being loved for who you are, not what you do or who you marry. Feeling controlled and conditional? That's not security at all." She started crying. Real tears. Not angry tears, but raw emotion. "I understand that now," she choked out. "But I wish I'd understood it sooner. I wasted so many years being afraid, trying to control things that didn't need controlling." I reached over, holding her hand as she cried. A few days later, she wanted to meet Franklin. Properly. Not just in passing. I brought him that weekend. She looked more alert sitting up. She shook his hand, thanked him. Then she started asking questions. About his work, his family, how we met. Franklin answered honestly, patiently. He talked about carpentry, about meeting me, about knowing immediately he wanted to know me better. My mother asked pointed questions about his business, his future. Franklin didn't get defensive. He just told the truth about loving his work, loving me, building a good life. I watched my mother's face. She was really listening. After he left, she was quiet for a while. Then she said, "I can see why you chose him. He clearly loves you. He treats you well. He seems like a good man who makes you happy." It wasn't a full apology for everything, not by a long shot. But it was something. It was her acknowledging that my choice was valid, that I knew what was right for my own life. And that, surprisingly, meant more than I expected. Gil called me the following week. My mother had given him new instructions for her will. She wanted to restore me as a beneficiary. I went to the hospital and asked her directly. "I want to do right by you," she said, "while I still can." I told her I didn't want her money if it came with conditions. "I built a life without it, Mom. I'm fine." She looked at me genuinely. "There are no conditions this time," she said. "It's not about control anymore. It's about love." I didn't know if I completely believed that, not yet, but I could see she was trying. The next week, Juliet and I took her to her follow-up appointment. We walked into the cardiology wing together. In the waiting room, she reached for both our hands, her grip firm. Her eyes filled with tears. "I've been thinking," she whispered, "about all the years I wasted trying to control you, instead of just loving you. I could have been enjoying having you both in my life this whole time. But I was too proud, too stubborn. I finally understand what I lost when I cut you off. And I'm so sorry it took almost dying for me to figure it out." Juliet squeezed her hand. My throat tightened. The nurse called her name, and we all stood up, together. After the appointment showed good progress, I suggested a family dinner. At our house. My mother looked surprised, then agreed immediately. Franklin and I spent the weekend getting ready. He cleaned. I cooked. We were both so nervous. Juliet arrived first, then Aunt Macy, then my mother, carrying a store-bought dessert. She walked through our small living room, taking everything in. She stopped at the dining table Franklin had built, running her hand across the smooth wood. She asked him how long it took, listened carefully, and said, "It's beautiful work, Franklin. I can tell you put real care into it." He looked pleased and a little shocked. We sat down. The conversation was light. Macy told stories. Juliet talked about work. My mother asked Franklin questions about his business, and actually seemed interested. She complimented my cooking, thanked me for hosting. At one point, I just looked around the table. This was exactly the kind of family gathering I'd always wanted but never thought we could have. Relaxed. Genuine. No one performing. 3 months passed. My mother continued recovering. We established a routine. A weekly phone call, dinner once a month. The first time I had to say no to one of her requests, a charity event on a night I had plans with Franklin, I braced myself for a fight. Instead, she just said, "Okay. Can we do lunch next week instead?" That moment proved to me she was actually capable of respecting boundaries. Our relationship isn't perfect, and probably never will be. She still makes comments sometimes that show her old way of thinking, but when I call her on it, she apologizes. She tries to do better. She asks about Franklin's work, remembers details. She reaches out to Juliet. The change wasn't dramatic or complete, but it was real. And it was consistent. I started to believe this new version of our relationship might actually last. One evening, I sat in our living room with Franklin, looking through photos from that family dinner. He pointed at one of my mother, laughing. "She looks so different," he said, "compared to the stern woman in the hospital months ago." I scrolled through more pictures and something clicked. For years, I thought the only way to win with my mother was to either submit completely or cut her off entirely. But I'd found a third option I never knew existed. I got my family back, but on terms that felt honest and healthy, not manipulative or conditional. My mother would never be the warm, unconditionally loving parent I wished I'd had. That controlling streak, that need to manage, it's always going to be a part of her. But she was trying, in ways she never did before. And that effort? That meant something real. I learned that sometimes, good enough is actually enough. And that imperfect relationships can still be valuable if both people are willing to work at them. Franklin put his arm around me. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "Just how grateful I am for how things turned out," I told him. And I truly meant it. So, I'm curious, have you ever had to choose between your family's expectations and your own happiness? What did you do? Or maybe you've had a parent who struggled with control. Let me know in the comments below. I really want to hear your stories.